Okay, it's streaming. Okay. Duolingo time. All I change. It's gaming. I'm waiting. Paling aman Tomish dah buat stream. Kena copyright mulu.
ご飯
Gohan.
水と寿司
Water and sushi? To, mizu to sushi. Gohan.
ご飯
Gohan, wait. Gohan. Is that a Dragon Ball? Yeah, that is a Dragon Ball thing. Not a Dragon Ball character. To.
と
To. Mizu to sushi.
ご飯
Gohan.
ご飯
Gohan.
ください寿司 と
Sushi is a Japanese word, right?
ご飯
寿司とお茶
Sushi to cha, sushi and thing.
ください
It's
To.
the same thing.
寿司ご飯
Gohan to mizu.
ご飯と水
Gohan to mizu. 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 Mizu to sushi kudasai. Mizu to sushi kudasai.
と寿司ください
Type shit. Sushi to ocha kudasai.
すとお茶ください
Sushi to ocha kudasai.
「寿司と水
Sushi and water.
寿司です
I'm gonna do this for 30 minutes, I think. Sushi dash. It's sushi.
寿司です
This.
ご飯と寿司ください
Sushi kudasai. No. Okay. Yeah. I
水です
got focus.
水です。水です。
It's water.
お茶です。
It's tea.
寿司です。
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 寿司です。寿司です。
ご飯です。
ご飯です。
ご飯と水ください。
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 ご飯 it's the same thing.
水とご飯ください。
水とご飯ください。They just switched it up.
寿司とご飯ください。
寿司とご飯ください。
ご飯と寿司ください。
ご飯と寿司ください。
Get more with Super Duolingo. Go ad-free and skip the
There's ads now?
Akan menambahkan rekomendasi ke playlistmu dan memberikan nuansa musik baru. Kamu juga bisa membuat sesi dengar bareng agar kamu dan temanmu bisa menambahkan lagu dan mendengarkannya bersama. Ketuk banner untuk mempelajari selengkapnya.
ご飯と寿司ください。
ください。水。
水。
Yo, why are you so emo?
寿司です。
It's sushi. ご飯。
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 水とお茶ください。
水とお茶ください。水とお茶ください。
と、お茶です。
お茶です。
お茶と寿司ください。お茶と寿司ください。寿司ください。寿司とお茶ください。とお茶ください。寿司とお茶。寿司とお茶。
寿司とご飯。寿司とご飯。
ご飯。
寿司。
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 水。水。
水。
お茶ください。
お茶
お茶ください。お茶ください。
お茶ください。
水ください。お茶。お茶。
寿司と水。
ください。
水ください。
Ada ads cuy ternyata sekarang Duolingo.
ご飯、水。ご飯、水。
ご飯ください。
水。ご飯。ください。
寿司。ご飯。
寿司とお茶。水とお茶ください。とお茶ください。
お茶 ご飯
寿司とお茶。
寿司とお茶。
ご飯と水。
水と寿司。
お茶
お茶と水。
水
Oh, I'm lagging.
ご飯です。ご飯です。寿司と水。
寿司と水。
ご飯と水ください。ご飯と水ください。
ご飯と寿司ください。
です。寿司です。
寿司です。
寿司です。寿司です。寿司です。お茶です。
お茶です。
水です。水です。
ご飯です。
ご飯です。
寿司です。
水です。
水です。Now it's less. Wait, 3-4 itu? I'm big. I'm big as fuck. I'm plotting and scheming. My hairstyle. No, I gotta fade. I gotta fade. I'm kidding. But I low-key gotta fade though. I low-key gotta fade. Low-key. Low-key got a big ass mustache too. Yup. No. No. I like green. Kenapa namaku 34? Right. Who is Koi Kang?
Buruan kak, buruan. Cepetan dong kak. Jangan sampai kelewatan kak. Ada diskon puas kilat di GrabFood. Cuma setengah harga lagi.
Fushiguro. Yeah. Yeah.
Serbu GrabFood sekarang. Waktu terbatas. Resapi alunan musik yang kamu sukai. Download untuk menikmati playlist dalam mode offline kemanapun kamu pergi, atau putar ulang lagu favoritmu berulang kali tanpa batas. Dengarkan semua musik sepuasnya tanpa iklan di Spotify Premium. Ketuk banner untuk mempelajari selengkapnya.
Baru 16 menit.
水とご飯
Mizu to gohan.
寿司とお茶ください
Sushi to
to お茶ください
寿司です。
It's sushi.
お茶と寿司くださいお茶と
sushi.
寿司ください
寿司とご飯
Sushi to gohan.
寿司とお茶寿司とお茶
ご飯と水
Gohan. Gohan to mizu. Ocha desu.
です
水です。
お茶とご飯ください。寿司です。
Sisters with me. Sisters with me. Open. What did I get? Huh? Am I lagging? No? Okay.
水とご飯。水とご飯。
お茶ください。
お茶ください。
ご飯ください。
ご飯ください。
お茶ください
水、お茶。
お茶と寿司お茶と寿司
お茶ください
ご飯とお茶
ご飯
ご飯と水。ご飯と水。
水と寿司寿司お茶
お茶と水ください。お茶と水ください。
水と寿司
ご飯と寿司。ごと寿司。
Get more with Super
お
お茶とご飯ください。
お茶ですおです
寿司とご飯
寿司とご飯
水です。水です。
寿司とお茶
寿司とお茶
ご飯ですご飯です
お茶とご飯ください。
お茶と
水とお茶ください。とお茶ください。
ご飯とお茶。
ご飯とお茶。
お茶と寿司ください。と寿司ください。
お茶と水ください。
お茶と水ください。
みです。
お茶です。
お茶です。
すです。
ごです。と
ください。寿司水
ください。
お茶。
I didn't read
お茶、水。
I didn't read the question. I didn't read the question, guys. Green tea and water.
お茶と寿司ください。
お茶と寿司
寿司ください。
水、お茶。
I didn't read the question, bro.
水です。
水とお茶ください。
水とお茶ください。
すです。
寿司とお茶ください。
寿司と
お茶ください。ごです。寿司とご飯。寿司とご飯。
お茶です。
お茶です。
寿司です。
寿司です。
ご飯
ごです。
おです。おです。
水。
ベッベッベッベッベッベッベッベッベッベッベッベッ I am a spy? What spy? Berapa menit? Maybe one more lesson. Two more lessons. Isha.
医者。
Isha.
医者。
Isha. Isha.
医者。
Isha.
優しい。
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 Nice. I don't know.
かっこいい。
かっこいい。かっこいい。
かっこいい。
Oh, there's a
かっこいい。
かっこいい。
かっこいい。優しい。
Cool and nice.
優しい。
医者です。
医者です。
です。優しいです。
She's nice. 優しいです。かっこいいです。
医者です。
医者です。She's a lawyer. No, she's a doctor. She's a lawyer.
医者。
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 But where? How do I? Okay, I guess.
ご飯ください。
寿司と
かっこいい。
優しい。優しい。優しい。
momen lebih asik sambil dengerin playlist Spotify buatan kamu. Masukin lagu kesukaanmu dan jangan lupa Spotify.
Ingin mengeksplorasi musik baru? Shuffle Pintar bisa menambahkan rekomendasi lagu ke playlist kalau kamu
Sensei.
先生。
Sensei.
Kamu juga bisa memulai dengar bareng dan mengundang temanmu untuk membuat
Lawyer.
dan menambahkan
弁護士。
playlist bersama
Bengoshi.
dengan fitur
Bengoshi.
lewati dan ulangi tanpa batas.
Who's that one guy?
Untuk mempelajari selengkapnya,
JJK. three lawyer guy. Hiromi Huguruma. Hiromi Huguruma. Bengoshi. Sensei.
先生。
弁護士です。
She say a lawyer.
優しい医者です。
Yasashi. He's a nice doctor.
かっこいい医者です。
She's a cool doctor. かっこいい医者です。かっこいい医者です。
先生。先生。
Yasashi sensei です。
です。
と。かっこいい先生。
弁です。
弁護士。弁護士。
弁護士
先生。
先生。
弁護士先生。
弁護士とせです。
先生と弁護士おばかげです。
せと弁護士。
Oh, nggak ada is ya. Sensei to bengoshi. One more. Gakusei.
学生。
Sensei gakusei.
学生。
学生。
人。
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 優しい人です。
優しい人。
Cool person.
かっこいい学生。
Cool student.
弁護士です。
弁護士です。優しい人です。
かっこいい人です。
かっこいい人です。She's a cool person. Cool lawyer. かっこいい弁護士
です。弁護士。
弁護士です。
弁護士です。
かっこいい弁護士です。かっこいい。
かっこいい。
学生です。
です。
かっこいい学生です。かっこいい先生です。
です。
One more. Iki terakhir.
Yasashi.
優しい。
優しい。先生と弁護士。
弁護士。かっこいい。
かっこいい。優しい学生。
A nice student. Yeah. 人。
弁護士医者。
弁護士医者。弁護士医者。A lawyer and a doctor.
先生。
優しい弁護士です。
優しい弁護士です。He is a nice lawyer.
優しい医者です。
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 医者です。
かっこいい人です。かっこいい人です。
He's a cool person.
弁護士と医者。
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 A lawyer and a doctor.
かっこいい人です。
かっこいい人です。
かっこいい人
He's a cool person.
です。
Next 15 minutes.
Get more with Super Duolingo.
You know what? No.
Spotify Premium adalah cara terbaik untuk menikmati pengalaman mendengarkanmu. Nikmati musik secara maksimal dengan memutar lagu dalam urutan apapun, mendownload untuk didengarkan offline dengan kualitas lebih tinggi, dan mendengarkan tanpa iklan. Kamu layak mendengarkan musik dengan kualitas terbaik. Ketuk banner untuk mempelajari selengkapnya. Belum bosan mengulang lagu favoritmu saat ini? Download dan putar lagu yang kamu sukai berulang kali dengan Spotify Premium. Dengarkan musik tanpa gangguan iklan dan putar lagu dengan urutan sesuka hatimu. Ketuk banner untuk mempelajari selengkapnya.
Okay, let's edit some shorts, guys. So I've been doing some shits. Wait, I can just do it here? TikTok is doing not great. Tapi YouTube juga stagnan. I don't know why. There's still 0 views on this one. I'm gonna re-upload this. Kan kata Gemini apa? I can just schedule this, right? Jadi aku bikin shorts channel to anyone listening, I guess. Aku bikin shorts channel, nyoba-nyoba aja to see where it goes. So I post like science, TTS stuff. Wait. On description or title. Bad. Wait, no, huh? No. So easily. Honey, kategori di mana kategori? This day. Can I use make a random 16 YouTube shorts thumbnail for that video?
Dengan premium, kamu bisa fokus mendengarkan musikmu. Putar lagu dari katalog berisi jutaan musik tanpa perlu melihat iklan, atau download playlist untuk mendengarkannya di mana saja. Kamu juga bisa memutar lagu favorit dalam urutan apapun dan bebas berganti ke lagu sebelumnya dan berikutnya sebanyak yang kamu mau. Kamu yang mengontrol musikmu. Ketuk banner untuk mempelajari selengkapnya. Temukan cara baru mendengarkan musik dengan Spotify Premium. Shuffle pintar akan menambahkan rekomendasi ke playlistmu dan memberikan nuansa musik baru. Kamu juga bisa membuat sesi dengar bareng agar kamu dan temanmu bisa menambahkan lagu dan mendengarkannya bersama. Ketuk banner untuk mempelajari selengkapnya.
Bam 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 bam. Oh shit. I'm sorry. Yo! I did not pick Israel. Oh kata kata orang upload dari HP guys. Let me upload it to Drive. Let me test it. shorts. Add description. Waduh, aku harus ngirim description Hold up. Oh guys, upload thumbnail. Monkey spinning monkeys. Monkey spinning monkeys. I see.
Waduh, beras habis. Gimana
Aku harus ngedit dulu di CapCut. Wow.
No daging, no telur, no sayur. Mager banget keluar
Oke.
yang bolong. Tolong.
Untung bisa nge-Grab Mart. No cemas pas isi kulkas mulai habis. Buka 24 jam. Tinggal klik beres kan? Belanja terima beres di Grab Mart sekarang.
Lagi kejebak macet ya? Sabar, macet pasti berlalu. Berlalu lalang maksudnya. Bikin sensation aja di Spotify. Dan kalau kalian pakai premium, kalian bisa jadi hostnya loh. Jangan lupa masukin lagu-lagunya Piwi Gaskins di jam session kalian. Kejebak macet enaknya ditemenin Spotify Premium.
Gitu kah? Ntar, it's uploading. To be and the rest will follow. Oh, I can just do that. Okay. Oh. Terus title-nya kirim WA juga. Oh no, it's not made for kids. Da. Lah, tak upload sekarang. Jeez. Aku telepon siapa iki, astaga. Who is calling me? Who is calling me? So 856 5775 5915. Bet ada iklan. Okay. Diddy. All right.
Waduh, beras habis. Gimana dong? Kulkas juga kosong. Hah, no daging, no telur, no sayur. Mager banget keluar was yang bolong. Hah, tolong.
Untung bisa nge-Grabmart.
There it is.
Gak cemas pas isi kulkas mulai habis. Buka 24 jam. Tinggal klik beres kan? Belanja terima beres di Grabmart sekarang.
I don't know. I'm uploading this at night.
Jangan sampai kelewatan, Kak.
Okay.
Ada
Whatever.
diskon puas kilat di GrabFood. Cuma setengah harga lagi.
Okay, let's move on.
Ayo, Kak. Buruan, Kak. Serbu GrabFood sekarang. Waktu terbatas.
Ini kemarin. Okay.
Everything all on my own. Can't you see my diamond ring? 20,000 karat gold. Girl, I wanna talk to you. I can hear your money speak. 100 million, maybe two. More than I could ever be. I could buy an aeroplane, fly you all around the world. Spending when I feel ashamed, spending 'cause I'm all alone. Girl, I wanna make you mine. Can't you give your heart to me?
3 facts that will completely change.
Terus satu lagi apa? Oh. Belum ada kan? That
Completely change how you see the world. And the last one is just unreal. Change how you and the last one is just unreal. First, sharks are older than trees.
Do I not have any other sharks? I do.
Sharks are older than trees, and even Saturn's rings. Fossil records show sharks appeared over 400 million years ago, while trees evolved around 350 million years ago, and Saturn's rings formed just a few hundred million years back. Sharks literally survived history before trees even existed. Rings. Fossil records show sharks appeared.
Tunjukkan selera musikmu dengan Premium. Mulai dengar bareng bersama teman dan tunjukkan lagu favoritmu kepada mereka tanpa jeda iklan. Dengan fitur ulangi dan lewati tanpa batas, kamu juga bisa memutar album favoritmu dalam urutan apapun. Ketuk banner untuk mempelajari selengkapnya.
First, sharks are older than trees. Fossil records Sharks are old. Saturn's rings.
Oh, berarti harusnya di belakang. No, cancel. Oke, berarti harusnya di belakang. Hold up, wait, oke. Berarti Saturn dulu. Saturn dulu. Trees.
Sharks now. While trees evolved around 300 years ago, while trees evolved around 350 million.
pusing.
Records show sharks appeared over 400 million years ago, while trees evolved. And Saturn's rings. Fossil records show sharks appeared over 400 million years ago, while trees evolved around 350. Trees evolved around 350 million years ago, and Saturn.
Hati-hati.
Trees evolved around 350 million years ago, and Saturn's rings. Formed just a few hundred million years back. Sharks literally survived history before trees even existed. Now, if you think nature is wild, years ago, while trees evolved around 350 million years ago, and
dude, my shit is lagging. I don't know, it's lagging.
While trees evolved around 350 million years ago, and Saturn's and even Saturn's rings. Fossil records show sharks appeared over 400 million years ago, while trees evolved around 350 million years ago.
Right. Okay, wait.
Sharks are older than trees, and even Saturn's over 400 million years ago, while trees evolved around 300 Trees evolved around 350 million years ago, and Saturn's rings formed just a few hundred million years ago, while trees evolved around 350 million years ago. Rings. Fossil records show sharks appeared over 400 million years ago, while trees evolved around 350 million years ago, and Saturn's rings formed just a few hundred million years back. Evolved around 350 million years ago, and Saturn's rings formed Sharks are older than trees, and even Saturn's rings. Fossil records show sharks appeared over 400 million years ago, while trees evolved around 350 million years ago, and Saturn's rings formed just a few hundred million years back. Sharks literally survived history before trees even existed. Now, if you think nature is wild, your own brain is even wilder. Enter the placebo effect. When you take a fake sugar pill 50 million years ago, and Saturn's rings formed just a few hundred million years 400 million years ago, while trees million years ago, while trees evolved around 300 over 400 million years ago, while trees evolved around 350 million years ago, and Saturn's rings formed just a
Okay, it's not possible to do it in it's so ass.
First, sharks are older than And the last one is just unreal. First, sharks are older than trees, and even Saturn.
Okay, yeah, no. It's not possible, guys. Not like last week we did. I'm just gonna do this off stream, dude. I'm just gonna do this off stream. It's laggy. I'm just gonna do this 3 and then wrap it up. It's not enjoyable. I rage quit editing, yes, I did. I did. Okay.
All right, congratulations. You have your first Laravel application running locally. We used Composer Run Dev to set up our local development server, and then we used layouts to compose what the start of our application should look like. We haven't really touched Laravel just yet, but don't worry, we'll get there. Laravel is about the whole package of an application from start to finish. But what good is an application if you only can see it in your browser on your machine? Why don't we get this Chirper application live on the internet with Laravel Cloud? It's the easiest way to deploy a Laravel application, and it's made by Laravel itself. There's a few things that you'll need, or at least knowledge of things that you'll need before we deploy. A GitHub account, you can create that free at github.com. Some basic Git knowledge, we'll walk through those commands together, and then your Laravel application from previous lessons, so you should have that ready to go. Now, it's possible your machine does not have Git terminal in the repository to that. If that's the case, Laravel Chirper application, we're going to initialize a new Git repository. That's done with the git init command. That way we have a repository ready for us to push to GitHub. What I'm going to do is add all of our files. We can do that by git add and then a period. And this adds everything to that git commit. And we're just going to do that. Git commit, and we're going to have a message of our first Laravel app. And because we have git ignore set up for us out of the box within Laravel, we don't have to worry about pushing something that shouldn't be pushed to github.com. Now on github.com, we're going to create a new Git repository. New repository. I'm going to create myself as the owner, and we're going to call this Chirper. You don't have to put a description if you don't want, and I'm going to make this private for now. Great repository. All the other default settings should be fine. And GitHub gives us some commands that we are able to use, and this is what we want. So we're going to copy this, and in our terminal, paste that in. If we refresh that GitHub repository, we should see, yes, there is all of our code ready to be deployed on Laravel Cloud. So I'm going to head to cloud.laravel.com. If you don't have a Laravel Cloud account already, you can sign up for one for free. It is free to get started. You do have to enter a credit card, which just means it is pay as you go. So as much usage that your application uses, that's what you're going to be
Well, I don't
for.
have a credit
Now we're going to
card
make this as cheap as possible for you when you push this application, but this is just a default. You can see here that that startup time is probably going to start data. You can click create, and then you color cloud database and accessibility looks push code. I'm just to GitHub. Our device brings us to our application. Laravel Cloud make on the status Cloud Chirper and see that happening in real time. See deployment as well as safekeeping and collaboration, and then we push this code through that GitHub repository to Laravel Cloud. It's a live application that now exists on the internet for your friends, family, and loved ones to see. And the great thing is, because of those automatic deployments, anytime you push new changes to your GitHub repository, more features that we add throughout this bootcamp, those changes will automatically be updated live on your site. Next, let's look how Laravel organizes code with what's known as the MVC pattern. What is MVC? Well, right now, your route in this web.php routes file, it's doing everything. It's handling the request, it's preparing data, it's returning a view. And it might not seem like it's doing that, mostly because Laravel does all that for you in this route facade that's getting this slash directory and it's returning a view. And it's simple, but it's doing a lot under the hood. So what does this look like as your application grows? You'll want a better way to organize things, and that's where the MVC model comes in. So what is MVC? MVC stands for Model View Controller. And if we're going to take this into an analogy, let's think of a restaurant. While MVC is not necessarily the order that everything happens in terms of model and then view and then controller within Laravel, let's talk about the controller first. This is what you would think of as the waiter in a restaurant. It takes your order, it coordinates everything, and then it brings you the food. Well, the kitchen would then be the model. This is what prepares the food, it manages the ingredients, the your data, I guess, in an application. And then there's the presentation, how the food looks on the plate when it arrives. It's your view. What this looks like in Laravel terms, the controllers handle your requests, it coordinates responses, while your models manage your data and your business logic, and then your views actually display the information to your users. Now, we've already seen what a view looks like. Each one has its own job, but your controller and your model haven't necessarily been shown to you in this course just yet. So let's go ahead and create your first controller. That way you have a little bit more insight as to how this all fits within a Laravel application. Just for simplicity's sake, why don't we move everything that we have in this routes file, route get, and then return view of home. Why don't we move this logic to a controller? We're going to generate one. Now we can do this in our terminal for application, or we can actually just do it in the terminal built into your code editor if there is one. I'm going to do that here, just for simplicity's sake. We could run php artisan and then a command. Now I'm going to tell you what this command is, and then we're going to take a look at why this command actually exists. We're going to say php artisan make controller. Then we can give a name of a controller here. But what is this? PHP artisan. That is Laravel's way of running specific commands. It's Laravel's command line tool. It's your Swiss Army knife, I guess, for Laravel development. We'll use it a lot to create things, not just controllers, but there are a ton of artisan commands that are available to be able to run anything within Laravel. And the cool thing is you can actually create your own as well. For right now, we're just going to be using a lot in this make directory of PHP artisan commands, mostly to make controllers, and later we'll make models, maybe database migrations as well. Artisan commands are incredibly powerful, so there's so much to dive into, but for now, let's go ahead and make a controller. PHP artisan make controller. And we don't have to add anything here afterwards. If we press enter, it's automatically going to prompt for what that controller should be named. You can even see what that looks like typically in terms of casing and in terms of how it should be spelled and maybe handled within a Laravel application. Because we are going to be creating chirps, we want a chirp controller. So chirp controller. We're going to stick with an empty controller for now, but later we'll go back and look at what resource actually provides for us. And you can see it created a specific file for us, this app http controllers chirp controller. All right, let's go ahead and open up that new file that it created. Again, that's app http controllers chirp controller. It's just a blank file, but let's go ahead and add the things that we had in our web route here. How do we do that? We're going to add an index method. That's public function index, and then we're just going to return a view. We're going to return a view of home. Don't forget the semicolon. And you can see here that our VS Code Laravel extension still takes us directly to that view that we have. So in our web routes, how do we change this to instead point to our index method in our chirp controller? Let's go ahead and clear this out. So instead of returning a view here, we're actually going to use the chirp controller, or importing index method Laravel extension. Still takes us directly to that view that we have. So in our web routes, how do we change this to instead point to our index method in our chirp controller? Let's go ahead and clear this out. So instead of returning a view here, we're actually going to use the chirp controller, or importing that in. It's going to be a class, and then we can pass it a particular method. In this case, I'm going to be direct and pass it that index method. Let's take a look at our browser. Refresh. Everything still works. Great. This is just a cleaner way of writing what we were doing directly in our routes file, but now all of this lives in our controller. Now we can slowly start to add to this controller as we build out our application. Now, controllers really shine when you need to prepare data and then serve that data. Again, similar to how a waiter might do this in a restaurant. We're going to add some sample chirps to see this in action. So in our index method, I'm going to add a chirps array. And this is just some sample chirps with a time, an author, and then a message. Now, how do we pass this into this view? Now, our second parameter is going to be an array. We're going to say that this is chirps, and that chirps is going to be equal to the chirps array variable. Now, how do we display these chirps in our view? Again, if we're talking about the MVC model view controller structure, we have our controller, and we're passing these chirps to our view. Now, how do we display them here? Well, this is where that blade templating controller structure we have.
Oh. Chirps.
We have our view. I'm going to add a chirps array. And this is just some sample chirps with a time, an author, and then a message. Now, how do we pass this into this view? Our second parameter is going to be an array. We're going to say that this is chirps, and that chirps is going to be equal to the chirps array variable. Now, how do we display these chirps in our view? Again, if we're talking about the MVC model view controller structure, we have our controller, and we're passing these chirps to our view. Now, how do we display them here? Well, this is where that blade templating comes into play. So a home.blade.php file is not just HTML, it is blade, and we can add some templating structure to this. In this case, for every chirp, we can say, maybe for each chirps as chirp, and then every single instance of chirps that we have in that array that is being passed in from this chirp controller, we're going to iterate over whatever HTML that we're passing in here. So I'm just going to say end for each here to say that this is the end of that for each loop. Now we have available the chirps array. We have the chirp author, the chirp message, and the chirp time. I'm going to paste that in here. Again, the chirp that we're looping through, the author, the message, and the time to go in. Time. I'm going to paste that in here. Again, the chirp that we're looping through, the author, the message, and the time to coincide with what we're passing in to the chirp controller. Let's see what this looks like in our browser. All right, that looks pretty good. Now you can see how our controller is going to allow us to pass additional data to different views, and we can also have different methods. So let's take a look at what that looks like. What I'm going to do is I'm actually going to copy all of this and delete this chirp controller, because when we used that initial method to create a controller, we just selected empty. What happens if we then create a chirp controller that is a resource controller? This is what you might typically use in a standard MVC structure. Model view controller. This resource allows for an optional model that you might have. We don't have a chirp model just yet, so I'm not going to select anything there. Now, in that chirp controller, we have 7 different methods. The index, create, store, show, edit, and update, and destroy. These are all methods that you would probably typically use within any standard MVC application. Just a hint, anytime we use an artisan command, we don't necessarily need to leave it blank. We could write chirp controller and then even pass it additional options or parameters. Most artisan commands have this ability, where I could pass it as the resource and it would automatically complete what we just had completed for us. Now you might start to see how each one of these 7 different methods that we have within a resource controller can be used within our application. For example, the index, it's displaying a listing of all resources. It's listing all of the chirps, this home page. The create method might be showing a form to create a new chirp. In our demo application, we're doing this on the same page, so we likely won't use this. The store, where we're creating and saving a new chirp. The public function show, to be able to display one single chirp. Edit, displaying a form for editing a single chirp. Update would be to update that single chirp. Then destroy, deleting a chirp. We're going to be using most of, if not all of these, eventually throughout our application. But for now, we're just using the index method. So to recap, here's what happens when someone visits your site. This route, this slash parameter, this root of your application, is then going to pass the chirp controller, specifically the index method of this chirp controller class. The controller prepares the data. It's weighting our table to decide how are we going to present this data. And the controller passes all this information to the view. In this case, that home
Ini kenapa dah? Whatever, it works.
.blade.php, where that view then renders that HTML with the data, and then the user sees this page. So why does all this matter? Well, right now we're using fake data, but imagine when we have thousands of real chirps in a database. The controller that we just set up, it's going to decide which chirps to show. It's going to take our order and then decide how to present them. The model, which we're going to learn about in the next lesson, it fetches them from the database. Then the view, that home.blade.php, at least for our index, displays them nicely. So each piece has its job. In the MVC structure, model, view, controller, your code stays organized, and then future you will thank current you for how things are organized and displayed to your user. So in our next lesson, let's start working with real data to see how your app might remember things permanently.
Iya, that was insane stuff by me. The SNS stuff, woo-wee, woo-wee. What a time to be alive. Ini CSP 32 masih ada bang. Cheese masih ada bro. Cheese, full cheese. Ngapain dia? Kita stalking. Jelas dari kelas apa nih? Nice. Dude, I didn't do no coding at all.
All right, we have these sample chirps that we're passing to our view layer. Again, this is our controller, the C of the MVC structure, and we're passing this to our view layer. But these chirps are just hard-coded values that we're passing from this controller. They don't actually exist in the database. So when you're creating an application, when you're putting it out onto the web, most of the time you need a database in order to save things that can then live forever, or at least until someone deletes their chirp. In lesson 2, we talked about how we have this database.sqlite, the same one that was generated for us when we created the initial Laravel application. When that Laravel installer scaffolded it out, database.sqlite is perfect for our local development environment because it's a real database. Everything exists in this single file. So the TLDR is SQLite is a great option for a database, and if you did want to move it into production using a different database, you really don't have to think too much about what that changes. Laravel just handles all that for you. But let's go ahead and get started with interacting with the database. And to do that, we need this little thing called migrations. In fact, we have a directory already enabled for us that has some migrations by default, but we're going to go ahead and create one from scratch. You can think of migrations as Laravel's way of interacting, creating, modifying, even rolling back your database changes automatically. So it's a file-based way of saying, hey, here's what is happening or has happened with your database. We're going to open up that terminal again using our handy PHP artisan command. We're going to say make migration. And again, most of the time I could just leave this blank, and if I was to press enter, it would give us the standard format of what a migration might be named and how you would input that into this field. So I'm just going to say that this is create chirps table, because that's what we're going to do. We're going to save chirps to our database. So we need a chirps table, and this is plural, just like it gave us a prompt for. Now that went ahead and created that file for us. So if we were to open up that database directory again, we should have a new migration. Yes, this last one, and it's time stamped as well for when we created it. Create chirps migration. Here's where we get to add the columns that we would need in our database for our chirps. You can think of this as how your database needs to be defined. What things do you generally store with a chirp entity? Now, first, most of the time, a chirp would be associated with a user. We need to know who actually proceeded to chirp. Now, Laravel gives us a handy table column for this. We can say column foreign ID. And now here is where we can pass in the ID. ID of another column, or add the columns that we would need in our database for our chirps. You can think of this as how your database needs to be defined. What things do you generally store with a chirp entity? Now, first, most of the time, a chirp would be associated with a user. We need to know who actually proceeded to chirp. Now, Laravel gives us a handy table column for this. We can say column foreign ID. And now here is where we can pass in the ID of another column in our database or another table in our database. For example, I'm going to say this is the user ID. And I'm going to make this nullable. Now, this isn't recommended in a production database, but just so that we can continue moving forward with our application, we don't necessarily need a user just for testing purposes. We want to be able to create chirps, edit them, delete them without having to worry about authentication. We'll get to that at a later lesson. And then I'm going to say that this is constrained. What this does, you can see this right here, it creates a foreign key constraint on this column referencing the ID column of the conventionally related table. What that means is it's grabbing the user ID and then saying it's going to exist within the user model, the user conventionally related. This is constrained. What this does, you can see this right here, it creates a foreign key constraint on this column referencing the ID column of the conventionally related table. What that means is it's grabbing the user ID and then saying it's going to exist within the user model, the user table within our database. And then this is something you might normally do within an application. I'm going to have this cascade on delete. Now, what does this mean? It means that anytime a user is deleted, their chirps are then deleted too. All right, that's the most wordiest column in our database migration for here. So the next ones are going to be simple. We just need a string. And in this case, this is just what it says. It is a string of characters that we can enter into our database. The first parameter is going to be what that name is. I'm going to say this is a message, and then we can pass an optional parameter of how much this string of max characters should it have. And we're going to say this is 255. And then, like you might have seen, Laravel already provides the timestamps and ID columns automatically generated for this migration, which is great out of the box. We don't have to touch this. This timestamps is a created at and an updated at column. So we might even see that in our database right here, where if I was to go into something like our users, we have a created at and an updated at timestamp.
Wait, what is that? What is that?
To the chirps table. So we might even see that in our database right here, where if I was to go into something like our users, we have a
SQLite. I don't have that extension, I guess. SQLite. But there it is, SQLite viewer. Bang. Shabang. There we go.
a created at and an updated at timestamp. Back to the chirps table. Now, how do we make this migration file that we created actually then exist in our database? Well, it's simple. We open up our command line again and we type php artisan migrate. And you see here, it created that chirps table, or actually it ran the migration, which in turn created the chirps table. This is a schema that created the chirps table with these particular columns. Now that we have our migration entered into the database, we have that new table, there's different ways that we can interact with the database. Before we create any UI elements to be able to interact with the database on our web application, we can do interactions with the database manually. Now, this is where the AI tooling that Laravel provides as a first-party extension. Laravel Boost is fantastic. It has tools out of the box to be able to have your AI interact with your database using the tools that Laravel expects. What does that look like? Well, Laravel has Tinker, which is PHP Artisan Tinker. What this does is allow you to interact with your database using Laravel commands. So I could say something like db select, and we're going to select, and this is raw SQL queries. We could say something like select a star from chirps. And yeah, there's nothing there because we haven't added any chirps yet. But there's other ways to interact with your database. You might have seen I already pulled up this database.sqlite, and VS Code and other IDEs might have a database viewer extension that you can install, open up, and be able to interact with the database there. And while most of these tools that are built into IDEs or extensions for IDEs like VS Code, they're usually just great for viewing things that are in your database, and that is handy. But there's also another visual approach like Table Plus or something like dbeaver or any other GUI editors for a database where you can point it to your database file and then be able to interact with it. For example, I could create my own chirp manually within this Table Plus GUI. Now, I'm discarding all those changes because we don't necessarily need to interact with the database manually for right now. It's just helpful to know that either using AI or a tool or even something like PHP Artisan Tinker, we could use these tools to create new chirps in the database before we even create code to do that. One thing I did want to point out, we create this foreign ID for a user ID table, but you might be thinking, hey, we didn't actually create that migration, right? Well, that's something that Laravel gives us out of the box. And you saw that we had that users table in our database.sqlite viewer. So if we were to click into that create users migration, we're creating a users table with a string of name, a string of email that has to be unique, and all of this is pretty readable for us. We have a timestamp that is email verified at, which could be nullable, and then a string of passwords. So there's a bunch of different tables that are created in this one migration, but it's helpful to know that Laravel does provide some of these tables out of the box, including users. So that's why we didn't create our own users table migration. It's just automatically using what Laravel set up. Now, before we continue, I do want to note that Tinker can be used with what we call Eloquent. This is Laravel's way of interacting with the database in a more clean manner. Now, this isn't necessary to grasp all at once. It's just helpful to know that there are other ways of interacting with the database other than using that DB facade. In this case, using select queries that has SQL language, and that might be confusing for you, but it's just helpful to know that there is a more eloquent, and that's actually the name of the tool that we interact with the database within Laravel, of being able to select or even create things within our database. Again, you don't have to worry too much about everything that you're learning right now. We're going to talk about it in more depth later, but for your first Laravel application, mostly to show you that's for next lesson, but also to show you that Tinker, or any way that we're assistance, what's specific with Tinker. You don't need to know all of these things all out here, and then inserting and look at the database through Tinker, but it's helpful to know what your AI or even what specific commands might do. I'm going to type this all out here and then later paste it into Tinker. So we have db table chirps. So we're entering into the chirps table for selecting the chirps table and then inserting a message of my first chirp in the database. And because we don't have a user, we can just leave it off of this DB table. The DB is a facade that Laravel gives us to more easily interact with the database instead of having to write those SQL queries that we wrote previously. But we do have to put created at and updated at as timestamps because Laravel doesn't give those by default. I'm going to clear this out, copy it, and then in PHP Artisan Tinker, I'm just going to paste.
Created at. No.
As timestamps because Laravel doesn't give those by default. I'm going to clear this out, copy it, and then in PHP Artisan Tinker, I'm just going to paste that in and press enter. And we get this true back. So that means that this was successful.
Chirps insert message. Oh. Bro.
Successful. This chirp was now entered into the database. So we could pull up our database, see this chirp, and see here, yes, this message was created, my first chirp in the database. But we can also do that in Tinker as well. We could say db table chirps get. And there we go. Here's our first chirp. Congratulations, you just entered something into the database. Say db table chirps get. And there we go. Here's our first chirp. Congratulations, you just entered something into the database using a command line tool. I'm going to exit from Tinker. There's two commands I want to make you aware of within the PHP Artisan namespace. That's migrate fresh, which means if you absolutely made a mistake, or maybe you just need to change an existing file, which is not the best way to do it, but if you're not in production, you can do whatever you want. PHP Artisan migrate fresh will drop everything and then create everything from scratch. So in this case, we don't have that chirp that we just created. Another one would be PHP Artisan Migrate Rollback. Now, if we created a new migration, in this case, maybe the chirps table, and we wanted to roll that back, it would run the down structure. If I was to go into that chirps table migration, we have this down structure. And here, this is going to drop the chirps table. It's going to run this migration if we ran this migrate rollback. So if I do that, because we ran everything, we now don't have anything in our database. So I'm going to run PHP Artisan migrate again. So you now have a real database with the ability to create real things in that database, in this case chirps, because we gave it a table, we gave it a proper structure, in this case a message, and then a relationship to users. And next lesson, we'll dive into what does that relationship actually mean. This is where that M of MVC comes into play, the model structure. So if you've thought that this is a little bit confusing because working with queries and stuff like that within a database can be a little bit confusing, next lesson is going to make everything a lot easier. Like we explored in the last lesson, now that you have a database, there's a number of different ways that you can interact with that database. You can use a GUI like Table Plus or dbeaver to interact with your database, even insert new things, delete things. That's a little bit more hands-on, where you have a more manual approach within PHP Artisan Tinker to use maybe raw SQL, which sounds a little crazy and a little strange and maybe a little scary. But you can also use something like the DB facade, which Laravel gives out of the box to say, hey, here's a little bit easier way of working within a database. But don't worry, it gets even easier. Right now, this lesson, we're going to talk about models. If we're going back to our restaurant analogy, the M in MVC model is our kitchen. It prepares the food, it organizes your data structure, it keeps everything nice and neat. And in a Laravel application, you can use models to interact with your database in a really, really beautiful way, an eloquent way. So as you can see here, I'm going to zoom out a little bit. We already have a model created for us. That's the user model. So why don't we take a look at what this actually looks like? There's a few things I want to point out. First, there's things like it can use specific things within Laravel, like has factory or notifiable. We won't dive into either of those this course, but it's helpful to know that there are things that can interact with a model as a whole. Next, we have this fillable array. This is just to show Laravel that people can, within your application, enter a name, an email, and a password into this table in your database. And so this fillable array is the one that we're going to focus on as we create a new model for our chirps. There are other additional arrays like hidden or cast, and what this does is allow you to interact with your model in even more depth. We won't touch those just yet. So let's go ahead and create our own model. Opening up our terminal again, PHP Artisan, make model, and then we're going to pass it a singular capitalized name for our model. In this case, chirp. Again, if we wanted to just leave that off, it gives us a little indicator of what that should be named. In this case, flight, but I'm not using flights, I'm using chirps, so chirp. Now, before I run this make model command for our chirp, I did want to make a note that Laravel has this time-saving flags for models, that if we were to create a model but add a dash, a parameter of MRC, this would do everything that we've already done within this course. It would create the chirp model, of course. It would create an M, a migration, like we did in lesson 6. It would create a resource controller, like we did in lesson 5. And that's RC for resource controller. But since we already have those, we're just going to make the model. Heading into that chirp model, just like I said, we want to first focus on that fillable array. So in this protected fillable array, we're just going to have our message. And this is because this is the only field in our model that we need to enter into the database. Next, Laravel's Eloquent allows us to attach these relationships between different models. That's going to be great for us because we have users that are associated to chirps and chirps that are associated to a single user. So we can do just that. We can create a public function of user. And here's where we can type hint this to say this belongs to, we're pulling that in, this use illuminate database eloquent relations type. We're going to return this, which is this model, belongs to, and then we can pass in the user class. So in this case, the user model. And this is letting Laravel know throughout this application, anytime we call user on our chirps, we'll be able to grab the user's information that's associated to that single instance of a chirp or multiple chirps. Now we want to do the inverse for what we already have within our Laravel application for our user. So if we go to our user model, we want to have this user associated to chirps. And this is more just for simplicity's sake. If I want to grab a single user's chirps, then this would be helpful. And we're going to do just that. Public function chirps. Again, this is on the user model. We're going to type hint this with a has many relationship, and that was imported in at the top. And then we're going to return this has many. And we're going to pass in again that model of chirp class. And since we're in the same model namespace, we don't have to bring in that chirp model as a import. So what do these relationships actually look like in code? I kind of talked through it with you, but why don't we actually write it out? If I want to grab a chirp's user, I could do this, or this is a chirp, and I want to grab the user. And this would give me something like, hey, this is Josh, who is the user. Again, this is just handy to know how all of this fits together. So in PHP Artisan Tinker, and again, well, this is just muscle memory to be able to learn how Tinker works and how our model works. You could do this with something like AI or even within a graphical interface to create these new users or maybe even chirps associated with the user. But this lets us know how our model's relationships also work as well. So if I wanted to create a new user, we could use the user namespace, the app/models/user namespace, and we want to create a new user. Now, here's where we can input the name of Josh. We can enter the email, and maybe this is josh@laravel.com, and then we could enter the password. Now, Laravel gives us a easy way to enter a password without having to encrypt it ourselves. We can do this bcrypt function where I'm going to then enter my password, and then we'll just say that this is a testing password. And then we're going to close this out. So there we go. We have our new user.
Wait up, Josh. Wait up, Josh. This Tinker shit is... shit. Ah, shit. Bed kurang. Bed.
So now password, and then we'll just say that this is a testing password. And then we're going to
Oh my god. .com.
close this out. So there we go. We have our new user. So now this user can have chirps associated with it. So why don't we do that? We already have the user, so now I want to create a new chirp. So let's say a new chirp is going to be from the user in this PHP Artisan Tinker session. We want to say that they're chirps. I want to create a new chirp for this user. And the message is going to be, this is a new associated chirp created by Tinker. And again, close that out. Oops, I had that backwards up there. So we need the bracket and then the parentheses. There we go. This is a new associated chirp, and it's automatically attached to the user ID of 1, the user that we just created that is then in our user variable. So why don't we see what this actually looks like now using that relationship. We can echo out the chirp user name. Oh, that's Josh. That's awesome. It's simple as that. We don't have to make a fancy SQL query in order to grab that name and then be able to make sure that that's actually our name. It just works because we created that relationship. And of course, we can use our model in different ways too. We can say that the app models chirp. I want to grab all of the chirps. Well, it's as simple as this. We're grabbing all of the chirps. We just have one in our database, but that's neat to know that within one line of code, I can get all of the chirps, all of their information, the users that are associated with them. And we can do the same thing. And instead of all, we can say even the latest, and we'll get those as well. And this is the same thing, but it would get the ones most recent first, where if we had multiple chirps up here for all of the chirps, it would show them in chronological order, the order that they were created rather than most recent first. And all of this is going to be extremely helpful as we start building out our chirper application, because you need all of these queries. You need these eloquent model relationships, as well as knowing, okay, how do we get the latest chirps actually sent to our view? I'm going to exit out of Tinker. Now let's go ahead and update our controller with our real data now. Because if we remember, in our chirp controller, we were just passing in fake chirp data. Well, instead of this chirps array, why don't we actually grab the chirps from the model? We can say chirp. We can bring in that model right up here. Use app models chirp. And I want to say, I want to grab all the chirps with the user. This is so that we can eager load that user relationship, and it prevents n+1 queries. In that case, having to query the database multiple times for things that we already have. We want to grab those chirps via the latest. Let's say we want to take 50 of them, maybe. This is so that we don't have all of the chirps loaded on one screen. There's other ways around this, but for now, this is going to be the easiest. And then we're going to get those chirps. And we shouldn't have to change anything else because we're still passing that chirps variable to our chirps home. So there's a few things that we need to change in order to update our view to accept this real data. First of all, it's not an array anymore. It's an actual model, and that's going to look a little bit different. I'm going to paste this in, then we'll walk through exactly what changed. First, I changed things to for else. This is a little bit easier, but mostly so I can teach you something new. For else, this says for else, all the chirps as chirp. This still exists in the same way, but if it's empty, then we can show an empty state. There's no chirps yet. Be the first to chirp. And then everything that we would have passed as an array in our PHP now is the chirp message. This is associated to that model now. Chirp created at, and this is a cool little Laravel helper, diff for humans, which is going to tell us how long ago did this actually happen. That specific.
Here I go.
specific date. And then this is just showing that it's going to say the username if that user exists. Otherwise, it will be anonymous because, again, we have the ability, at least right now, to say that no user has to create a chirp. We can create one without having an authenticated user. So what does this look like in the browser? Well, it looks like this. You can see that this was a chirp that was created by us. We did that within Tinker. I'm going to go in the database and create some more just so you can see. In our chirps, we're going to create a new one. We don't have to use it as a user ID, but I'm just going to say this is my second Tinker user. So what does this look like in the browser? Well, it looks like this. You can see that this was a chirp that was created by us. We did that within Tinker. I'm going to go in the database and create some more just so you can see. In our chirps, we're going to create a new one. We don't have to use it as a user ID, but I'm just going to say this is my second chirp. And we're going to say that this is the same date and time, just for simplicity's sake. There we go. We have an anonymous chirp because this chirp does not have a user associated with it. Let me do this a couple more times. And there we go. We're starting to see how this is turning into a real world application. We're having things stored in the database. At least we're being able to then read them and also take relationships from them, saying, hey, this is anonymous. There's no user associated with it. But this one has a user, and that user has a name. Just to confirm how those relationships work, instead of showing user name, maybe I want to show user email here. There we go. There's the email that I entered for my user that I created. So now your app has real data. You have chirps that are in the database, but you now have an easier way to work with those chirps using models and specifically using Eloquent within Laravel to query that data, but also write that data as well. And those relationships between users and chirps is something that's going to make this application a whole lot easier in the end, and every application that you make within Laravel. So next up, let's clean up our application a little bit, get some UI niceties in there, componentize some things, and then get our database and our application ready for users to start entering their own information. All right, our application is starting to take shape, but it looks pretty basic. This is the start of having our full Chirper application, but let's do a little bit of transformation, a little bit of TLC. We're going to add some user avatars, format some timestamps, and then utilize Daisy UI's components to make this look just a little bit nicer. The first thing is this home.blade.php is great, but it'd be nice if we could get every chirp as its own component. So that way we can only have one place that we're modifying just the chirps that are being shown. So in this case, this whole card right here. Again, we can create components within the components directory. I'm going to create a new file that says chirp.blade.php. So let me go ahead and paste in this chirp component, and we'll talk through some of the things that we changed. So here's pretty close to what we had previously, but now we're just making it a little bit cleaner.
Blade formatter tuh. Blade formatter. What the heck? There we go.
Now, if there is a chirp user, we're going to use this avatars.laravel.clown, which is a free service to have these neat little gradients for you whenever you're needing these avatars that we're having for our application. We're just passing in the user email to generate the avatars.laravel.changed. So here's pretty close to what we had previously. But now we're just making it a little bit cleaner. Now, if there is a chirp user, we're going to
Card body.
use this talk through some of the things that we changed. So here's pretty close to what we had previously. But now we're just making it a little bit cleaner. Now, if there is a chirp user, we're going to use this avatars.laravel.clown, which is a free service to have these neat little gradients for you whenever you're needing these avatars that we're having for our application. We're just passing in the user email to generate them specifically for that user. And then we have a default one for anonymous users. Now here's the neat thing with Blade components. We can pass in a prop, in this case an array of chirps, or in this case a chirp model, a chirp instance of an eloquent model. And this prop then allows us to access the chirp user or chirp user name or things like a chirp created at or a chirp message when we use this component in our view. And that's what we're going to do in our home view. So in our home view, we're going to, we can clear this out, but I might just replace everything. And let me paste this in. And so here we still have an empty state. We changed that up a little bit. To make the styles look a little nicer, but we are passing in a data or chirp message when we use this component in our view, and that's what we're going to do in our home view. So in our home view, we're going to, we can clear this out, but I might just replace everything. And let me paste this in. And so here we still have an empty state. We changed that up a little bit to make the styles look a little nicer. But we are passing in a new component, that xchirp component that we just created. We're passing in the prop, and in this case, that's what a colon indicates. It's a prop that we can pass into the component of the chirp. So we're still looping through all the chirps like we used to before. Or we're just looping through it in the instant. indicate as we can clear this out, but I might just replace everything. Instance of an eloquent model. And this prop then allows us to access the chirp user or chirp user name or things like for that user. And then we have a default one for anonymous users. Now here's the neat thing with Blade components. We can pass in a prop, in this case an array of chirps, or in this case a chirp model, a chirp instance of an eloquent model. And this prop then allows us to access the chirp user or chirp user name or things like a chirp created at or chirp message when we use this component in our view. And that's what we're going to do in our home view. So in our home view, we're going to, we can clear this out, but I might just replace everything. And let me paste this in. And so here we still have an empty state. We changed that up a little bit to make the styles look a little nicer. But we are passing in a new component, that xchirp component that we just created. We're passing in the prop, and in this case that's what a colon indicates. It's a prop that we can pass into the component of the chirp. So we're still looping through all the chirps like we used to before. We're just looping through it in the instance of a component. Let's see what this looks like in our home page. Great, I cleared out some components, and so we just have anonymous components for it right now, but this is looking pretty good. So now that we're cruising along, why don't we get some more sample data without having to open PHP Artisan Tinker every time we want to do that? Laravel gives us an easy, pretty good. So now that we're cruising along, why don't we get some more sample data without having to open PHP Artisan Tinker every time we want to do that? Laravel gives us an easy way to do this with something called seeders. If we search for seeder in our application, we have this database seeder file. And you can see here we have a user factory already created, which this just means that a new user can be created if we run a seeder within our database. Seeders are a great way to make sample data that we can then just make sure our application is looking and feeling and working the way we would expect. We can create a seeder, you guessed it, with the PHP Artisan command. So I'm going to say PHP Artisan make seeder, and we're going to call this chirp seeder. We won't get into factories in this particular course, but factories are a great way to make random data, where within seeders, it's going to be a little bit more specific. This is basically just telling our database, let's run a particular command, let's do some things within models or eloquent as we're populating the database. You can think of seeders as an automated way to run PHP Artisan Tinker commands, so you don't have to type it all out. I'm going to paste this in here. And so these are just some sample chirps, an array of chirps, and we're just saying if there are less than 3 users, which currently there are in the database, I'm going for eloquent as we're populating the database. You can think of seeders as an automated way to run PHP Artisan Tinker commands, so you don't have to type it all out. I'm going to paste this in here. And so these are just some sample chirps, an array of chirps, and we're just saying if there are less than 3 users, which currently there are in the database, let's go ahead and create some new users with this information. Again, this is exactly what we would do within Tinker. This is just making it a little bit easier for us if we wanted to ever create multiple versions of this data. For each chirps as message, every user is going to get a random chirps based off of this chirps array. And so running the seeder command is as simple as saying PHP Artisan DB seed. We're going to pass in the class of the chirp seeder, and that database was successfully seeded. Again, a seeder is just an easier way to have all those Tinker commands run for us, but within a way that Laravel expects. So in this case, we're just running all of that PHP code, but seeding the database with it. Again, we're not getting into factories, which is the actual creation of randomized data that you might have seen in that user factory file, but that's for a different course. So if we were to take a look, oops, this looks good, but it looks like we have a CSS issue with a little bit extra spacing now that we seeded that database. Yeah, I think it's because we have these p tags, which are adding some extra block classing that we don't need. I'm just going to replace them with span classes and a gap of 1. There we go. That's what we want. So now we have a reusable blade component for chirps. We have a way to generate chirps if we ever needed to kill this database and start it up again. And then we have a clean way of showing user information, as well as generating a specific avatar for that user based on that user's email. So we're moving right along. Next up, since it's still read only, we're going to let users create their own chirps. So let's actually make this social network thing social.
Pendek chirp modulnya. Ya.
All right, the seed, we're going to pass in the class of the chirp seeder. And that database has data that you might have seen in that thing now that we span class. User fact PHP code. Just an easier command is as simple as saying for each chirps as message, every user is going to get a random chirps based off of this chirps array. And so running the seeder command is as simple as saying PHP artisan db seed. We're going to pass in the class of the chirp seeder. And that database was successfully seeded. Again, a seeder is just an easier way to have all those Tinker commands run for us, but within a way that Laravel expects. So in this case, we're just running all of that PHP code, but seeding the database with it. Again, we're not getting into factories, which is the actual creation of randomized data that you might have seen in that user factory file, but that's for a different course. So if we were to take a look, oops, this looks good, but it looks like we have a CSS issue with a little bit extra spacing now that we seeded that. Our chirper application is showing chirps that we have stored in the database, but we still don't have a way for our users to actually create their own chirps and then store them in the database. So that's what we're going to do in today's lesson. We're going to build a form, we're going to handle the validation with that form, and then we're going to store those chirps that users create in the database, and all of it happens with the things that are built into Laravel. Now, we're still saving the actual user authentication for a later lesson, but we are going to allow our users, as anonymous users, to create those chirps. So why don't we add the form at the top of our feed, and we can get going from there. We really just want a form right about here, after the latest chirps header, and then before we actually list the chirp. So I'm going to put a form there, but we're not going to wire this up. Nothing is actually going to happen when we submit this form. It's just a plain HTML form. There's nothing special about this, with one text area and then a button to submit. But yeah, there's nothing that actually happens when we hit submit. If I was to why don't we add the form at the top of our feed, and we can get going from there. We really just want a form right about here, after the latest chirps header. And then before we actually list the chirp. So I'm going to put...
I think that's it for today. I feel overwhelmed. No, I do not feel overwhelmed. I just feel like I'm getting the part where I'm not focusing. Well, I'm not, understanding anything. So while I understand the read stuff, I need a new session to recap. Model view controller. Jadi nampilinnya, jadi kita punya model chirp sama chirp controller. Ini buat nge-show, mungkin create and stuff. Lalu ada chirp, ini modelnya. Lalu ada chirp seeder. Message chirp. Ini chirp model belongs to user. Nah, di usernya juga ada. Has many chirps. Okay. I think that's it. And then chirp ini ngomponenin props, ini refer ke chirpnya, refer ke ini harusnya nama model. Terus dipanggil di sini pakai for else empty x layout x slot title x chirp. Okay. Okay. Kita kerja proyek. No, bukan ini. Manual verification guide. Um, aku lupa ya. No, bukan admin tiket wave. Salah, bentar. Oh, at Saya tak kirim ke Mas siapa? Oke, pakai punya aku sih. Oops, I just leaked it. Nobody's watching anyway. Oh, okay. Okay. Oh iya. Apa tak push ya? VPS, edge functions, secrets. nggak bisa lagi, bentar. Kayaknya sih iya, harusnya sih iya. Oh, this is a secret. Shit. Is my Luna okay? My shit is almost over, I think. Cukup lah ya, aku nanti bulan baru beli lagi. Lumayan buat 1 bulan. 86%. Ini hapus aja lah. tambahin sama link GitHub-nya, gitar kabel. I guess I have to configure it. Cek aku ngecek function logs-nya last 24 hours. Orphan candidates deleted. Gak bisa ngecek yang kemarin. Oke. Oh, parek nelpon rek. Sopo iki? Who is calling me? Who is calling me? Delapan satu empat. Delapan satu empat tujuh sembilan dua lima tiga tujuh tiga satu. Bad. Ini harusnya udah sih. Alright, bad. Bad. Nah, bisa. Pinjol anjir. Dataku kesebar kah? Ya. Oh, ada ininya sekarang. Simpan bukti. Oke, nggak bisa. Oh shit. Did I break something? Shit, did I break something? Could not find table public and scan my cache. Schedule progress updates. Oh, ini belum di migrate ya? Belum di upgrade, belum di migrate. Insufficient balance? Fuck. What? Shit. Ini masih ada. Ah, shit. Semuanya. Ah, this is embarrassing. Ah, fuck. Wait, it says 88% or 87. Well. Tak taruh sini sih. Well, this is embarrassing. Ah, shit. Well, kasih dah. Let me top up first, actually. Gila-gila anjir, aku pakai Soul, pakai Luna aja udah cukup, padahal salah. Salah. Itu nggak tak push tadi. Jadi 200.000 sekarang. Makanya murah banget. Token base 10. Aku pakai berapa token? Is even anyone watching my stream, bro? I'm just gonna head out, bro.